May I have your leftovers, sir?
But when the Mafia boss looked into her eyes, everything changed. It was a cold Thursday evening, exactly 9 p.m. Inside Aurelio's, one of the most exclusive and dangerous restaurants located on Madison Avenue in Manhattan's Upper East Side. On every table lay expensive plates of steaming hot meals, some perfectly seared Wagyu steak, others butter-poached lobster, truffle-infused risotto, and tall bottles of rare, high-quality Italian wine worth thousands of dollars. At one corner of the restaurant, in the private dining room behind bulletproof glass, sat Cubana Diamond, a 32-year-old self-made mafia boss. He was the feared king of New York's criminal underworld, controlling nightclubs, shipping routes, and corrupt officials spread across Brooklyn, Manhattan, and many other boroughs in the city. Yet tonight, he sat there in the restaurant completely alone. No associates, no lieutenants, no allies by his side. He wore an elegant, expensive three-piece suit, custom-tailored Italian fabric that fit his muscular frame perfectly under the restaurant's dim amber lights. His neck was covered in tattoos that told silent stories. A rose for his dead mother, teardrops for the brother he couldn't save, and symbols of every territory he'd conquered through blood and violence. On his wrist sat a diamond-encrusted Rolex worth more than most people's homes. His plate held a perfectly cooked $500 Wagyu steak, barely touched. A glass of $5,000 Barolo wine sat beside it, catching the light like liquid rubies. But despite all this luxury, despite all this power, Cubana Diamond's cold gray eyes held nothing but emptiness. He had built an empire on fear. He had turned his pain into power. He'd learned the hard way that in his world, trust was a weakness that got you killed. And so he sat there, surrounded by wealth and protection, yet more alone than any homeless person on the streets outside. The restaurant hummed with the quiet sounds of New York's elite, the soft clink of crystal glasses, the low murmur of business deals being made in hushed tones, the careful footsteps of waiters who knew better than to disturb Table 7. Even the corrupt politicians and wealthy oil executives kept their distance from Cubana's corner. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone feared what he could do. Then something impossible happened. Through the polished mahogany doors, past the security guards in black suits, past the velvet ropes and the metal detectors, a figure stumbled into the private dining area. A young black woman, in clothes that looked like they had been worn for weeks, a torn, faded dress that might have once been beige but was now stained with the dirt of survival. Her feet were wrapped in shoes held together with duct tape. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was gaunt from hunger, but still carried a strange, quiet dignity. Elizabeth. She shouldn't have been able to get past security. She shouldn't have been able to enter this world of wealth and violence, but somehow she had. And now she stood there, trembling, her hands shaking as she took one step, then another, moving toward Table 7 like a moth drawn to a flame that might burn her alive. Cubana's bodyguards immediately moved to intercept her. Their hands went to the guns hidden beneath their jackets. This was a breach, a serious one. People had been killed for less. But then Elizabeth dropped to her knees beside Cubana's table, and she spoke. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the expensive silence like a blade. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Time stopped. Cubana Diamond froze, his fork suspended in midair, a piece of perfectly cooked steak still on it. He turned his head slowly, his cold eyes meeting hers, and in that moment, in that single impossible moment, something shifted. Her eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone begging. They were the eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose. Eyes that held pain and hunger, yes, but also something else. Something that looked like defiance wrapped in desperation. Something that looked like strength hiding beneath weakness. Something that reminded him impossibly of his own mother's eyes in those final days before she died, cleaning rich people's houses while he stole food to keep them alive. His bodyguards moved closer, ready to drag her out into the alley and make her disappear forever. One of them whispered urgently, "Boss, should we?" But Cubana raised one tattooed hand, a simple gesture, universal in meaning. "Stop." The bodyguards froze. The restaurant held its breath. and Cubana Diamond, the man who had built his empire on the principle that mercy was weakness, who had killed men for far less disrespect than this, who had sworn 15 years ago never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again, found himself doing something he hadn't done in over a decade. He hesitated. "Sit down," he said, his voice low and dangerous, but not quite threatening, not yet. He gestured to the chair across from him with the same hand that signs death warrants for dozens of men. "Eat." Elizabeth's eyes widened in shock. The bodyguards looked at each other in confusion. Somewhere in the restaurant, a fork clattered against a plate. And as Elizabeth slowly, carefully rose from her knees and moved toward table 7, her hands still trembling, something began that would change both their lives forever. A miracle was about to happen, but not the kind anyone expected. Because when a mafia boss looks into the eyes of a desperate woman and sees his own humanity reflected back at him, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't the enemy circling outside. It's the war that begins inside his own heart. Thursday nights at Aurelio's weren't just dinner for Cubana Diamond. They were a reminder. A ritual carved into his schedule with the same precision he used to carve his empire out of New York's bloody underworld. Christian Foster had died 15 years ago in a basement in Brooklyn. The boy who'd stolen bread to feed his dying mother, who'd believed that hard work and honesty could lift you out of poverty, that version of him had been beaten to death by men who worked for the Scorpion Syndicate. They'd left him bleeding on concrete while his younger brother Marcus screamed in the corner, too terrified to move. Christian Foster had stayed dead on that floor, but something else had crawled out of that basement. Something harder, something that understood the only law that mattered in this city. Predators eat or predators starve. Cubana Diamond had been born in that blood. He'd built his empire the way Rome was built, through conquest and calculated violence. The first territory came easy. He'd killed the man who'd beaten him and taken his corner in Brownsville. Then another corner, then a block, then a neighborhood. Each expansion marked in blood, each betrayal answered with brutality so savage it became legend. By the time he turned 25, he controlled half of Brooklyn's nightlife. The clubs with lines around the block, where Wall Street traders paid $500 for bottles of vodka and pretended they were dangerous. The underground gambling dens where fortunes changed hands on the roll of dice. The shipping routes through the port of New York, where containers full of luxury goods moved through customs without a second glance, thanks to NYPD officials whose mortgages he paid and whose children's college tuitions he funded. Everyone who mattered in New York's underworld knew 3 things about Cubana Diamond. He kept his word, he paid well, and crossing him was suicide. Not the quick kind either, the kind that took days and left a message written in screams. His penthouse in Tribeca sat on the 40th floor of a building he owned through shell companies, stacked so deep the FBI had given up tracing them. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that should have felt like victory. The Brooklyn Bridge lit up like a necklace of diamonds, the Hudson River reflecting Manhattan's lights like liquid gold, the streets below crawling with 8 million people, thousands of whom paid him tribute whether they knew it or not. But the penthouse was a mausoleum. Marble floors that echoed with every footstep, minimalist furniture that nobody ever sat on, a kitchen where no food was ever cooked, a master bedroom with a California king bed where he slept alone, his gun under the pillow, and security cameras feeding live footage to screens he never turned off. He learned his cardinal rule the hard way, written in the blood of everyone he'd ever loved. Never let anyone close enough to hurt you. His mother had gotten close. Cancer had hurt him through her. His brother Marcus had gotten close. The Scorpions had hurt him through Marcus, slit his throat in an alley 3 years after that basement, left him to bleed out alone while Cubana was across town consolidating power. After Marcus died, Cubana burned everything, burned it with a rage so pure it scared even his own soldiers. He'd hunted the Scorpions for 2 years, killed 17 of them himself, sent their pieces back to their families in boxes. But he'd never found the man with the scorpion and dagger tattoo, the one who'd held the knife to Marcus's throat. That ghost haunted him still, lurking somewhere in the city's shadows, waiting. So Thursday nights at Aurelio's became his ritual, alone at table 7, surrounded by bulletproof glass and armed guards, eating meals that cost more than his mother had earned in a month, drinking wine she'd never tasted, a reminder of how far he'd climbed and how much it had cost. He'd built an empire, but empires, he'd learned, were just expensive ways to be alone. Until tonight. Until a woman in rags asked for his leftovers and looked at him like he was still human.
Elizabeth ate like a woman who'd forgotten what full felt like. Her hands trembled as she lifted the fork, as if her body didn't quite trust that the food was real. She didn't cut the steak with any elegance. She tore into it, chewing slowly, deliberately, making each bite last. Her eyes closed briefly with each swallow, a small prayer of gratitude written across her gaunt face. Cubana watched her from across the table, his own meal forgotten. His bodyguards stood at a distance, confused and tense, hands never far from their weapons. The rest of the restaurant had gone silent. Even the waiters pretended not to notice the homeless woman eating Wagyu at the most dangerous man in New York's table. "When did you last eat?" he asked, his voice low. Elizabeth swallowed before answering, taking a long drink of water. "Tuesday. A woman at a shelter gave me half a sandwich." She looked up at him, and there was no shame in her eyes. Just facts, just survival. Before that, Friday. Some leftovers from a dumpster behind a deli on 125th Street. She took another bite, and Cubana signaled to a waiter. "Bring another plate, and soup, something warm." The waiter hesitated for only a second before nodding and disappearing. "You didn't bring me here to feed me," Elizabeth said, her voice steadier now that food was settling in her stomach. "Men like you don't do charity, so what do you want?" Cubana leaned back in his chair, studying her. She was right, he didn't do charity. But there was something in her eyes that wouldn't let him look away, something that reminded him too much of the mirror. "Tell me how you ended up on your knees in my restaurant." She set down her fork, and for a moment the hunger in her expression shifted into something darker, something that looked like rage wrapped in grief. "My family had a bodega in the Bronx. My parents, my little brother, we sold groceries, lottery tickets, beer to the neighborhood guys. Nothing special, just trying to make it, you know?" The soup arrived. Elizabeth wrapped her hands around the bowl like it was precious, breathing in the steam. 2 years ago, I was in the back organizing inventory. My brother was at the register. My parents were restocking shelves. Her voice stayed flat, mechanical, like she'd told this story to herself so many times it had lost all emotion. 3 men came in. I heard the bell above the door. Then I heard my brother say, "We're closed." Then I heard the gunshots. Cubana's jaw tightened. He knew this story. He heard variations of it 100 times in his world. "I hid in the storage room behind boxes of cereal," Elizabeth continued, staring into the soup. "They killed my brother first, then my father when he tried to fight back. My mother," her voice cracked for the first time, "my mother begged them, told them we didn't see anything. But one of them laughed, said, 'That's the problem, you did see.'" She lifted the spoon to her mouth, sipped the soup, then continued as if discussing the weather. "They shot her twice. I stayed hidden for 3 hours, covered in blood that had soaked through the floorboards. When I finally came out, the police were there. They asked questions, took statements, promised justice. That was 2 years ago. Nothing ever came of it." "The Scorpion Syndicate," Cubana said. It wasn't a question. Elizabeth's eyes snapped up to meet his, and there it was, the fury he recognized, the hunger that had nothing to do with food. One of them had a tattoo on her neck, a scorpion wrapped around a dagger. I'll never forget it. Cubana's blood ran cold. The same tattoo, the same syndicate, the ghost that haunted him. I've been living on the streets since then, invisible, watching, listening, following every lead. I'm not just hungry for food, Mr. Diamond. I'm starving for the truth, and I'm starving for justice. She leaned forward, her eyes burning into his. "So tell me, why does a mafia boss hesitate when a dead woman asks for his leftovers?"
The ride to Tribeca happened in silence. Elizabeth sat in the back of Cubana's armored SUV, staring out at the city lights blurring past. She'd traded her plate for something far more dangerous, the attention of New York's most violent man. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else, something like hope wrapped in calculated risk. The penthouse elevator required a key card and a fingerprint scan. When the doors opened directly into Cubana's apartment, Elizabeth stepped into a space that looked more like a museum than a home. Cold, beautiful, lifeless. "Describe the tattoo again," Cubana said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey at the marble bar. He didn't offer her one. This wasn't hospitality. This was business. Every detail. Elizabeth stood in the center of the vast living room, her worn clothes a stark contrast to the polished floors. Scorpion wrapped around a dagger. The scorpion was detailed. You could see every segment of its tail, every claw. The dagger pointed down, like it was dripping. Black ink, but the blade had red mixed in, blood red. She closed her eyes, pulling the memory back. It covered the whole right side of his neck, and there were numbers underneath, small, looked like a date maybe, 0817. Cubana's hand froze halfway to his mouth. The glass trembled slightly before he set it down. August 17th. "You know it." Not a question. Elizabeth watched him carefully, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. "That's the date they killed my brother." Cubana turned to face her, and his eyes held something new. Not sympathy, but recognition. 3 years ago, Marcus Foster. They slit his throat in an alley in Red Hook, left him to bleed out like a dog. His voice was flat, empty of emotion, but his knuckles were white against the bar. "I've been hunting the man with that tattoo ever since, the one who held the knife." Elizabeth felt her breath catch. "Then we're hunting the same ghost." "No." Cubana moved toward her, each step deliberate, predatory. "You've been surviving on streets, eating from dumpsters, playing detective with no resources and no plan. I've been building an empire specifically designed to burn the scorpions to ash. We are not the same." He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, gun oil maybe, or the metallic scent of old violence. "But you have something I need. You saw his face. You can identify him. And the scorpions don't know you're connected to me yet. That makes you valuable." "So what are you offering?" Elizabeth met his gaze without flinching. "Protection, resources, a chance at revenge." Cubana's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You work for me. You feed me information. You become bait when I need you to be. In exchange, I keep you alive, fed, and armed with everything you need to watch that man die screaming. And if I say no, then you walk out that door and go back to eating garbage while the man who killed your family walks free." He tilted his head. "How's that working for you?" Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, weighing survival against surrender, freedom against revenge. Then she extended her hand. "I accept, but when we find him, I get to pull the trigger." Cubana looked at her hand, then gripped it. His palm was warm, calloused, marked with old scars. "Deal, but you follow my rules. You do exactly what I say when I say it. This world doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither do I." He released her hand and gestured toward a hallway. "Guest bathroom, third door on the left, shower. There are clothes in the closet that might fit. They belong to someone else." He didn't elaborate. "Get clean, get some sleep. Tomorrow we start hunting." As Elizabeth disappeared down the hallway, Cubana returned to the windows overlooking Manhattan. The shower started running, the first hot water she'd felt in weeks probably. He sipped his whiskey and watched the city breathe beneath him, 8 million lives pulsing in the darkness. He'd just made a deal with a desperate woman, brought a stranger into his world, broken his cardinal rule, never let anyone close enough to hurt you. The water kept running. Cubana finished his drink and poured another. He wondered if he'd just made his first mistake in 15 years. Or His best move yet. The surveillance operation was supposed to be simple. Sit in a parked car outside a warehouse in Queens, watch the Scorpion shipment arrive, identify faces, leave. Cubana had done this 100 times, but he'd never done it with Elizabeth in the passenger seat, her eyes sharp and focused, taking in every detail like she'd been trained for this. "That one," she said suddenly, pointing at a man climbing out of a black sedan. "Third from the left, silver jacket. He was there." Cubana raised the binoculars. The man was mid-30s, muscular, moving with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable for anything. "You sure?" "I lived on the streets for 2 years. You know what you do when you're invisible? You watch. You remember." Elizabeth's voice was steady, clinical. "He came to the bodega 3 times before the murder. Always bought cigarettes, always paid cash, always looked around like he was memorizing the layout. He was the scout. I'd bet my life on it." Cubana lowered the binoculars and studied her profile. She wasn't trembling, wasn't hesitating. Most people in her position would be drowning in trauma, paralyzed by fear. But Elizabeth had turned her grief into a weapon. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for." "Most people underestimate the homeless girl." She glanced at him, you included. He almost smiled. Almost. "Take a photo. We'll run his face through my contacts, see what comes up." Elizabeth pulled out the phone he'd given her. Untraceable, encrypted, probably worth more than her family's entire bodega had been. She snapped several shots, zoomed in, captured the license plate of the sedan. Professional. Efficient. They sat in silence as the warehouse operation continued below them. Men loading crates, money changing hands, the machinery of organized crime turning like it always did. Elizabeth studied everything, filing details away behind those dark, burning eyes. "The rose on your neck," she said finally, breaking the silence. "What's that about?" Cubana's hand instinctively went to his throat, touching the ink. Most people knew better than to ask him personal questions. "None of your business." "We're hunting ghosts together. I think that makes it my business." He should have shut her down, should have reminded her that she was an asset, not a confidant. But something in her voice, not pity, not curiosity, just genuine interest, made him answer. "My mother. She died when I was 17. I'm sorry." "Don't be." She worked herself to death cleaning mansions in Connecticut for people who didn't know her name. She'd come home with her hands raw and bleeding, smelling like bleach and exhaustion, and she'd still make dinner for me and my brother, still tuck us in like we were worth something. His voice stayed flat, but his jaw tightened. The rich families she cleaned for, they had everything. We had nothing. So I started stealing. Food at first, then money, then anything I could get my hands on, to feed us, to keep us alive. Elizabeth listened without interrupting, her attention focused entirely on him. She got cancer, the kind that wealthy people survive because they have insurance and doctors who give a damn. We had nothing. I watched her fade away in a hospital bed that smelled of death and disinfectant, while nurses who looked at us like we were garbage asked if we could pay our bills. Cubana's fingers traced the rose tattoo. After she died, I swore I'd never be powerless again, never be poor, never let anyone I loved suffer because I couldn't protect them. "So you became this," Elizabeth said softly. "So I became this." She was quiet for a moment, then reached across the space between them. Her fingers touched the rose tattoo, gentle, careful, like touching something sacred. "She'd be proud of your survival," she said. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "Not sure about the rest." It was the first honest thing anyone had said to him in years. Not fear dressed as respect, not flattery hiding calculation, just truth, raw and uncomfortable. Cubana stared at her, this woman who'd lost everything, who had every reason to lie and manipulate to survive, and she was telling him the truth instead. "No," he said finally. "She wouldn't be proud, but she'd be alive if I'd been this sooner." Elizabeth's hand lingered on his neck for another heartbeat before she pulled away. "Maybe. Or maybe you'd just be dead too." Below them, the warehouse operation wrapped up. The sedan pulled away. And Cubana realized that somewhere between the restaurant and this moment, Elizabeth had stopped being just an asset. That should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like something dangerous. Something like hope. Word traveled fast in New York's underworld. Faster than bullets. Faster than money. By the end of the first week, every corner boss, every lieutenant, every soldier from the Bronx to Staten Island knew the same impossible thing. Cubana Diamond was keeping a woman in his penthouse. The Diamond who hadn't let anyone close in 15 years. The Diamond who'd built his empire on ice and isolation. The Diamond who'd once killed a man for suggesting he had a weakness. Now he had one. And she wore borrowed clothes and ate breakfast at his marble counter like she belonged there. Marcus cornered him in the private office above the Brooklyn nightclub, the one where real business happened after midnight. Cubana's second-in-command looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot with worry. "Boss, we need to talk about the girl." "Her name is Elizabeth." Cubana didn't look up from the surveillance photos spread across his desk. "I don't care if her name is the Virgin Mary. People are talking. The Russians are circling. The Italians are watching. Even our own guys are wondering if you've gone soft." Marcus slammed his hand on the desk. "You're making yourself vulnerable, making us all vulnerable." "I'm using her to find the Scorpions. It's strategy." "It's suicide." Marcus leaned forward. "You took her to the market yesterday, in broad daylight. You're walking around the city with her like she's something that matters. And when things matter to you, they become targets." Cubana finally looked up, his eyes cold enough to frost glass. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Marcus held his gaze for 3 seconds before looking away. Even loyalty had its limits when staring into the void. "No, boss. I'm trying to keep you alive." The call came at 2:47 p.m. the next day. Elizabeth had wanted to see the farmers market in Prospect Park. Something normal, she'd said. Something that reminded her of when life was simple. Cubana had assigned 2 bodyguards. It should have been enough. It wasn't. His driver broke every traffic law getting to Brooklyn. Cubana was out of the SUV before it fully stopped, his gun already drawn. The market had scattered, vendors abandoning the stalls, shoppers running, someone screaming about calling 911. He found them near the organic vegetable stand, 3 men with knives. His bodyguards on the ground, bleeding but alive, and Elizabeth, backed against a table, holding a broken bottle like a weapon, her arm already sliced and dripping red. The men saw Cubana and smiled. They knew who he was. They were here anyway. That told him everything. "Walk away," one of them said. "This doesn't have to be your problem." Cubana shot him in the kneecap. The man went down screaming. The other 2 lunged, knives flashing in the afternoon sun. Cubana moved like violence set to music, sidestepped the first blade, caught the man's wrist, twisted until bones cracked like kindling. The knife clattered to the pavement. He drove his elbow into the man's face, felt the cartilage collapse, let him drop. The third man hesitated. Fatal mistake. Cubana was on him in 2 strides. He didn't shoot this one. Shooting was too quick, too clean. He needed them to remember, needed everyone watching from their hiding spots to understand. He broke the man's jaw first, then his ribs, then his knife hand, each finger snapping individually while the man sobbed and begged. The violence was surgical, calculated, performed in broad daylight in front of a crowd that was already recording on their phones. When he finished, all 3 men were on the ground, alive but destroyed. Cubana stood over them, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. He looked directly at the phones recording, his voice carrying across the silent market. "She's mine. Touch her and face extinction. Tell your bosses. Tell everyone. This is the only warning." He turned to Elizabeth. Her eyes were wide, but not afraid. Something else lived there. Something like awe mixed with horror. He grabbed her uninjured arm, gentle despite the violence still singing in his veins. "Come on." In the SUV, as his driver peeled away from the sirens approaching, Elizabeth pressed a cloth to her bleeding arm. "You just painted a target on my back." "I painted a target on anyone stupid enough to aim at you." Cubana's jaw was tight. "No one touches what's mine. I'm not yours." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something dangerous passed between them. "Tell that to the 3 men I just broke. See if they believe you." Elizabeth held his gaze, and slowly, carefully, something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "You're right. They won't." The message was clear, but so was the danger. Now everyone knew she mattered, and in Cubana's world, that was the same as signing her death warrant. The meeting at City Hall was supposed to be routine, bribe the right councilman, smooth over some zoning issues for a new club in Williamsburg, maintain the careful balance between legitimate business and the empire underneath. Cubana had done it 100 times. He left Elizabeth in the penthouse with security, 4 armed men, cameras on every entrance, protocols that had kept him alive for 15 years. It should have been impenetrable. His phone rang at 4:23 p.m. in the middle of the councilman's practiced speech about community concerns. Unknown number. Cubana stepped into the hallway to answer, already feeling ice crystallize in his gut. "Hello, Diamond." The voice was familiar, too familiar. Marcus. "Where are you?" Cubana's hand tightened on the phone. "You were supposed to be at the docks." "I'm exactly where I need to be. Where I've always been." Marcus laughed, and it sounded wrong, poisoned with something that had been hiding for years. "Funny thing about loyalty, boss. It's expensive, and the Scorpions pay better." The world tilted. Cubana's vision went red at the edges, his free hand reaching for the gun under his jacket. "What did you do?" "What I was paid to do 3 years ago when I let them know exactly where your brother would be walking home. What I've been doing ever since, feeding them everything. Your roots, your deals, your weaknesses." Marcus paused, savoring the moment. "Your girl." Cubana was already running, shoving past startled officials, his bodyguards scrambling to keep up. "If you touched her..." "She's alive, for now. The Scorpions want to make a trade." Marcus's voice turned cold, professional. "You surrender. Sign over half your territory, Brooklyn, the shipping routes, and your club network. In exchange, they'll give you the girl back. You have 24 hours to decide." "I'll kill you." Cubana's voice was barely human. "I'll take you apart piece by piece." "You were untouchable, you know. 15 years and nobody could get close. No family, no friends, no weaknesses. You were perfect." Marcus sounded almost regretful. "Then you caught feelings for a street rat. Love made you weak, made you predictable, made you human again. And humans bleed." The line went dead. Cubana hit the penthouse 17 minutes later. The security team was gone. Not dead, just gone, which meant they'd been paid off or threatened into walking away. The cameras had been looped. Professional work. Inside work. Inside the penthouse was exactly as he'd left it, except for one thing. Elizabeth's borrowed jacket draped over the couch, and underneath it, a photograph. Elizabeth bound to a chair in some concrete room, her face bruised but her eyes still defiant. And behind her, barely visible in the shadows, a man with a tattoo on his neck. A scorpion wrapped around a dagger. The ghost had a face now, and he had Elizabeth. Cubana stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by the empire he'd built on blood and isolation, and felt something he hadn't felt since watching his brother die. Genuine, paralyzing fear. Not fear for himself. He'd walked into death 100 times without blinking. Fear for her. The woman who'd asked for his leftovers and somehow ended up mattering more than territory, more than money, more than the empire that had cost him everything. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Clock's ticking, Diamond. Empire or the girl. Choose." Cubana looked at the photograph again. Elizabeth's eyes stared back at him from the glossy paper, and he could almost hear her voice. "You're right. They won't believe you." She'd been talking about the man at the market, about his claim that she was his. Now he had 24 hours to prove it, or watch her die for the mistake of getting close to a man who'd sworn never to let anyone matter. His cardinal rule was simple: never let anyone close enough to hurt you. He'd broken it, and now they were both paying the price. Cubana crushed the photograph in his fist, his mind already racing through options, strategies, impossible odds. The fear was still there, cold and sharp in his chest, but beneath it, something else was building. Something that looked like fury. Something that looked like war. He had 24 hours. He'd burn the city down in less.
Cubana made the first call at midnight. To Dmitry Volkov, the Russian mob boss who'd been trying to take Brooklyn for 3 years. "I'm offering you East Brooklyn. The clubs, the routes, Everything. No cost. You just have to help me burn the scorpions tonight. Dmitri was silent for 5 seconds. Then, what's the catch? No catch. After tonight, I'm done. You want my territory? Come and take it. But first, we paint Red Hook red. The second call went to Vincent Calabrese, old-school Italian mafia who still remembered when honor meant something. They took someone from me. I'm going to war. You want a piece of the scorpions? Tonight's your chance. Vincent laughed, dark and knowing. The diamonds finally bleeding. I'll bring 20 men. Third call, Chen Wei, Chinatown triad leader. Fourth, the Irish crew from Hell's Kitchen. Fifth, independent operators who'd been waiting years for Cubana to show weakness. By 2 a.m., he'd assembled an army of enemies. They all wanted the same thing, his empire carved up and distributed, and he was giving it to them. All of it. Every territory he'd bled for, every deal he'd killed to protect. For a woman who'd asked for his leftovers 2 weeks ago. His remaining loyal soldiers stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. "Boss, you're throwing away 15 years of work," one of them said, voice cracking. "For what? For her?" Cubana loaded his gun, a Glock 19, the same one he'd used the night he became the Diamond. For the only thing that ever mattered. He stood in his penthouse one last time, looking at the city that had been his kingdom. The lights stretched out like fallen stars, millions of lives that would never know his name, never know what he'd built in the shadows. He'd conquered this city, owned it, bled for it, and he was walking away. He opened his safe and took everything. Guns, ammunition, the knife his brother had given him before he died, the bulletproof vest that had saved his life 4 times. He dressed in black, efficient, each movement practiced. This wasn't his first war, but it might be his last. At 3:47 a.m., 47 men from 5 different criminal organizations converged on Red Hook. Enemies standing side by side, united by greed and opportunity. Cubana stood at the front, and they all knew he was a dead man walking. But dead men make the most dangerous soldiers. The warehouse loomed against the dark sky, corrugated metal and broken windows, the kind of place where people disappeared and no one asked questions. Scorpion soldiers lined the booth, at least 20 of them, assault rifles catching the streetlight. This wasn't an exchange. This was an execution. Vincent stepped beside Cubana. "You know this is suicide." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I am." Vincent nodded slowly, respect and pity mixing in his weathered face. "Then let's make it count." Cubana checked his gun one last time. He thought about his mother, who died believing the world could be kind. His brother, who died because Cubana hadn't been strong enough to protect him. Elizabeth, who'd looked at his rose tattoo and told him the truth. She'd be proud of your survival, not sure about the rest. His mother wouldn't be proud of what he'd become, the monster who'd build an empire on corpses. But maybe she'd be proud of what he was about to do. Trade the monster for the man. Trade the empire for a chance at something real. He holstered his gun and walked toward the warehouse entrance. His army of enemies followed, a strange parade of violence united by temporary purpose. The Scorpions would be expecting him to negotiate, to trade territory for Elizabeth's life. They weren't expecting him to bring hell itself. Cubana pushed open the warehouse door. Inside he could see them, at least 30 Scorpion soldiers, Marcus standing in the center with a smug smile, and behind him Elizabeth tied to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes burning with that same defiant fire. She saw him and shook her head slightly. "Don't do this. Don't throw it away from me." But it was too late. He'd already made his choice. Marcus raised a megaphone. "Cubana Diamond, you came alone like we—" The rest of his sentence drowned in gunfire as 47 criminals opened fire simultaneously. Chaos erupted, bullets tearing through metal, men screaming, the warehouse exploding into a war zone that would make headlines for months. Cubana walked into the storm, gun raised, every shot calculated. Better to die as a man than live as a monster. And tonight, he'd remember what being human cost. Everything.
The warehouse became hell with a soundtrack of gunfire and screaming metal. Cubana moved through the chaos like a ghost, each step practiced, each shot deliberate. A scorpion soldier lunged from behind a crate. Cubana put 2 bullets in his chest without breaking stride. Another came from the left with a knife. Cubana broke his arm, took the knife, kept moving. This was what he'd been built for. This was the monster they'd created when they beat Christian Foster to death in that basement 15 years ago. But tonight, the monster had a purpose beyond survival. He fought through 8 men to reach the back stairs. Blood splattered his face, some his, mostly theirs. His vest had caught 3 bullets already, ribs screaming with each breath. Dimitri's Russians were holding the main floor, trading fire with scorpions on the catwalks. Vincent's Italians had pushed through the loading bay. It was beautiful, coordinated chaos. The basement door was reinforced steel. Cubana shot the lock 3 times before it gave. He kicked it open and descended into darkness. Elizabeth was chained to a support beam, her wrists raw and bleeding, her face a canvas of fresh bruises. But her eyes, those eyes that had stopped him cold in Aurelio's, still burned with life. "You idiot! You beautiful idiot!" Cubana shot the chain links, a metal sparking and snapping. "Can you walk? Can you shut up and get us out of here?" She stumbled forward, and he caught her, feeling how much weight she'd lost in just 3 days. They'd starved her, broken her, but they hadn't killed what mattered. They made it halfway up the stairs when Marcus appeared at the top, gun drawn. Blood ran down his face from a gash above his eye, but he was smiling, always smiling. "Should have known you'd burn it all down. That's what love does, makes smart men stupid." Love made me remember what I was fighting for. Cubana raised his gun, but Marcus was faster, his shot catching Cubana in the shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. Elizabeth screamed. Marcus descended the stairs, gun trained on Cubana's head. 3 years I waited for this. 3 years playing loyal while watching you build your empire, and now I get to watch it fall with you. He cocked the hammer. "Any last words, boss?" "Yeah," Elizabeth's voice came from behind him. "Duck." Marcus turned, confusion flickering across his face for 1 fatal second. Elizabeth drove a shard of broken glass from a shattered bottle on the basement floor straight into his neck, the same spot where the scorpion tattoo curled on the man they were hunting. Marcus's gun clattered down the stairs. He grabbed at his throat, blood pulsing between his fingers, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. He tried to speak, but only gurgling came out. Elizabeth twisted the glass deeper. "That's for my family, and for his brother, and for every person you sold out." She pulled the glass free and let him fall, watching him bleed out on the concrete stairs with the same clinical detachment she'd used eating that first steak. Cubana stared at her, holding his bleeding shoulder. "You just killed my second-in-command. Your traitorous second-in-command." She wiped the blood on her torn clothes and helped him to his feet. "Now can we please leave before this whole place comes down?" Sirens wailed in the distance, NYPD responding to what sounded like a war zone, because it was. Cubana and Elizabeth emerged from the basement into carnage, bodies everywhere. His temporary allies were already fleeing, their deal complete. The scorpions were broken, scattered, and Cubana's empire was finished. He'd violated every code, made deals with enemies, given away territory, shown weakness. By tomorrow, every crew in New York would be hunting him. They stumbled out into the pre-dawn air, sirens getting louder, red and blue lights reflecting off wet pavement. Elizabeth leaned against him, both of them bloodied and broken. "We have to run," she said. "They'll all be coming for you now." "I know." Cubana looked back at the warehouse, his last stand, his final war. Then he looked at her, this woman who killed for him with a piece of broken glass and no hesitation. And he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in 15 years. "I know," he repeated, "and I don't care." They disappeared into the New York night, 2 ghosts leaving behind kingdoms and corpses, enemies and empires. He'd lost everything. And somehow, holding her hand as they ran, Cubana felt something he hadn't felt since childhood. Free. 3 months later, Cubana stood outside Aurelio's, and the city looked different now. Not softer. New York never got soft, but clearer, like someone had wiped away years of blood-tinted glass, and he could finally see what he'd been building all along. Elizabeth stood beside him in a navy blue dress, her hair pulled back, the bruises long faded. She looked up at the restaurant that had changed everything and smiled. "Ready?" "Almost." Cubana squeezed her hand. "There's something I need to tell you first. About 2 weeks ago." Her smile faded slightly. She knew that tone. "What happened?" "We found him, the man with the scorpion tattoo." The world seemed to pause. Elizabeth's breath caught, her fingers tightening around his. "Where?" "Port of Newark." He'd been hiding in plain sight, working security for a shipping company, thinking the chaos had made everyone forget. Cubana's jaw tightened at the memory. He was on break, sitting at the back of the port near the water, smoking a cigarette, relaxed like he didn't have a care in the world. Elizabeth's eyes darkened. "Tell me you didn't go without me." "I would never." Cubana pulled her closer, his voice dropping. "I waited, called you. We went together, remember? You were in class and I picked you up. You didn't even ask where we were going. You just knew." The memory crystallized between them. That afternoon 2 weeks ago, when Cubana had appeared outside Hunter College in his SUV, his face carved from stone, and Elizabeth had simply gotten in. No questions, just understanding. They'd driven to the port in silence, found him exactly where Cubana's intelligence said he'd be, sitting on a concrete barrier at the water's edge, container ships groaning in the distance, seagulls screaming overhead. The man was older than Elizabeth remembered. Grayer, but the tattoo was unmistakable. That scorpion wrapped around a dagger, the date underneath, 0817. The date Marcus Foster died. Cubana had approached from the left, Elizabeth from the right. The man had looked up too late, cigarette falling from his lips as recognition hit. "You," he'd whispered, scrambling backward toward the water's edge. "You're supposed to be dead?" Elizabeth's voice had been ice. "Like my family? Like my 14-year-old brother who wanted to be a teacher?" The man had reached for a gun. Cubana shot it out of his hand, the weapon spinning into the dark water below. "She's not finished talking." Elizabeth had pulled out the knife, the one Cubana's brother had given him before he died, the one that survived everything. "You killed them in our bodega, shot my brother David first while I hid and listened to him scream, then my father, then my mother, who begged you to spare us." "It was just business," the man had stammered, backing up until his heels hung over the concrete edge, waves crashing below. "The scorpions paid me to—" "Business?" Elizabeth had stepped closer, the knife steady in her hand. "You're going to die the same way my brother died, slow, scared, begging." And she'd done it. Cut his throat the exact way he'd cut David's, not deep enough to kill instantly, but deep enough to make him feel every second draining away. They'd watched him clutch at his neck, blood pouring between his fingers, his eyes wide with the same terror her family must have felt. He'd stumbled backward, over the edge, falling into the black water below with a splash that was swallowed by the sound of cargo ships and industry. No body would ever be found, just another person who disappeared into New York's dark waters, pulled down by currents and guilt. The ghost was dead. The revenge was complete. But standing there with blood on her hands, Elizabeth had felt nothing. No triumph, no closure. Just emptiness, and the knowledge that her family was still gone, that vengeance was just another word for hollow. Cubana had held her as she cried against his chest, her tears mixing with harbor salt and the metallic scent of justice. "It's over," he'd whispered. "We can stop hunting ghosts now." Now, standing outside Aurelio's 2 weeks later, Cubana watched Elizabeth process the memory. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I am now." She looked up at him, and something had shifted in her eyes. Not innocence lost, that had died in the bodega storage room years ago, but maybe innocence transformed, hardened into something that could survive. "He's gone. They're all gone. Marcus, the scorpions, the man who pulled the trigger. We actually did it." "We did.
But something else happened, too, after the warehouse, after everything fell apart.
"The Alliance," Elizabeth said, understanding dawning. Vincent called first, then Dimitri, then Chen Wei. One by one, every crew I'd armed for that suicide mission reached out. Cubana shook his head, still amazed by it. They didn't want to carve up my territory. They wanted to offer it back. The meeting had happened in a neutral warehouse in Queens, all the major players present. Vincent Calabrese had spoken first, his weathered face serious. "You did something nobody else had the balls to do, Diamond. You burned your own empire to save one person. That's not weakness. That's strength we can respect." Dmitry Volkov had nodded agreement. The Scorpions needed to fall. We all knew it, but nobody could touch them. You gave us the opening, showed us that honor still means something in this business. Chen Wei had added, "We don't want another power vacuum. We want stability. We want someone who keeps their word, who knows when to fight and when to protect. We want you to keep your empire, Diamond, but not alone, as part of an alliance." The proposal had been revolutionary, a joint council of New York's major criminal organizations. No more constant warfare, no more territory wars that left bodies in the streets. Instead, cooperation, boundaries, rules, and Cubana Diamond sitting at the head of the table, not as a dictator, but as the chairman who'd proven that power meant nothing without honor. "I kept the empire," Cubana said now, watching Elizabeth's reaction carefully. "Brooklyn, Manhattan, the shipping routes, all of it. But it's different now. It's an alliance, not a dictatorship. We vote on major decisions. We respect boundaries. We built something that doesn't require constant bloodshed to maintain." "And you're still the Diamond," Elizabeth said, not a question. "I'm still the Diamond, still feared, still dangerous." He pulled her closer. "But I'm also yours. I chair council meetings and broker peace treaties. I maintain the empire and the alliances that keep this city from tearing itself apart. But on Thursday nights, I'm just Christian Foster, taking you to dinner." Elizabeth studied his face, the tattoos, the scars, the cold gray eyes that had learned to warm when they looked at her. "Both worlds. You're living in both worlds." "Can you accept that?" Kubanak asked, and for the first time in 15 years, there was vulnerability in his voice. "I'm not walking away from power. I'm not becoming some civilian. I'm still a criminal, still the man who built an empire on blood. But I'm trying to build something better now, something with rules, with limits, with you beside me." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, and Cubana felt genuine fear, not the fear of bullets or betrayal, the fear that he'd asked too much, that she'd walk away, that choosing both worlds meant losing her. Then she smiled, really smiled. "You think I survived 2 years on the streets, killed 2 men with my bare hands, and fell in love with a mafia boss because I wanted a normal life?" "Elizabeth, I accept all of you, Cubana Diamond. The empire, the violence, the power, the alliances, and the Thursday night dinners. The man who rules the underworld and the man who holds my hand in fancy restaurants." She reached up, touching the rose tattoo on his neck. "I accept the monster and the man, because they're both you, and you're mine." Something in Cubana's chest unlocked, something that had been closed since his mother died, since his brother bled out in an alley, since he decided that being untouchable meant being alone. "Ready?" Elizabeth asked again. This time, he was.
They walked into Aurelio's together. The owner's eyes widened in recognition, then respect. Cubana Diamond was back, and everyone knew what that meant. Order, power, fear wrapped in expensive suits. But also something new. Honor, alliances, and a woman who stood beside him as an equal. "Table 7, Mr. Diamond," the owner said without hesitation. Table 7. His table. Still his. Never given away, because some things didn't change even when everything else did. They sat across from each other, and it felt both familiar and brand new. 3 months ago, she'd been on her knees begging for scraps. Now she sat across from him wearing borrowed confidence and hard-earned strength. "The steak here is still criminally overpriced," Elizabeth said, studying the menu. Considering who's ordering it, that's appropriate. Cubana smiled. A real smile. The kind that transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. They ordered wine, appetizers, entrees that cost more than most people's rent. They talked about her classes at Hunter College, about the council meeting next week where they'd formalize the new territory agreements, about the warehouse in Red Hook they'd bought not for crime, but for legitimate business, a fashion design studio, Elizabeth's dream, funded by his empire. When the food arrived, Cubana reached across the table, his tattooed hand covering hers. The rose for his mother, the tears for his brother, the symbols of every territory conquered, every battle won. History written in ink on skin that had learned to touch gently. You asked for my leftovers once. Now everything I have is yours. The empire, the power, the money, the alliances, all of it. For whatever that's worth. Elizabeth's fingers intertwined with his, her eyes holding his without fear, without shame, with nothing but raw honesty. It's worth everything, because you chose me over power, then chose to take the power back and make it mean something better. You chose to be both the monster and the man, and you chose to let me love both versions. I killed the ghost with you, watched him fall into the harbor, felt nothing but emptiness, but holding you after, that felt like something. That felt like living instead of just surviving. We're both living now, Elizabeth agreed, in the empire and outside it, in the darkness and the light, together. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, each moment, each choice that had led them here. Around them, Aurelio's hummed with the usual rhythms, wealth and power, deals and whispered conversations. But at table 7, 2 people who'd walked through hell holding hands were writing a different story. The kind where asking for leftovers leads to sharing an empire, where revenge gives way to something more valuable than justice, where the monster learns to love without losing his teeth, and the survivor learns to rule without losing her soul. Outside, New York pulsed with 8 million stories. Inside Aurelio's at table 7, Cubana Diamond and Elizabeth Davis finished their meal together. He still ruled his empire, she still hunted her dreams. They'd killed their ghosts and buried their dead, and for the first time in both their lives, they were exactly where they belonged. At the same table where it all began. Together, powerful, free, and impossibly, dangerously, beautifully human. The diamond had found his queen, and the queen had found her kingdom, not in some fairy tale castle, but in the blood and brilliance of the New York underworld, where love was the most dangerous weapon of all, and they wielded it together.
Moral lesson. This story teaches us powerful truths about life, love, and redemption. 1. Never judge people by their appearance or circumstances. When Elizabeth knelt beside Cubana's table in tattered clothes, everyone saw a beggar. But beneath her poverty was a woman of strength, intelligence, and unbreakable dignity. The people we dismiss might be the very ones who change our lives forever. 2. True strength is not about being untouchable. It's about having something worth being vulnerable for. Cubana built an empire on the belief that isolation meant safety. But real power came when he chose to risk everything for someone he loved. The walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prisons that trap us. 3. Revenge is empty. Purpose is everything. Both Cubana and Elizabeth got their revenge. They killed the man with the scorpion tattoo, but it didn't fill the void or bring their families back. What healed them wasn't vengeance, but finding purpose in each other and building something meaningful together. 4. Love doesn't make you weak, it makes you fight harder. Marcus sneered that love made Cubana weak, but it was love that gave him the strength to burn down his empire, face impossible odds, and rebuild something better. Love doesn't diminish power, it transforms it into something worth having. 5. Redemption is possible, but it requires choice. Cubana didn't become a saint. He remained the diamond, powerful and feared. But he chose to use that power differently, with honor, with limits, with humanity. We can't erase our past, but we can choose what we build with our future. 6. Sometimes the person who needs help the most is the one with everything. Elizabeth had nothing, but asked for leftovers. Cubana had everything, but was starving for connection. Sometimes the poorest person in the room is the richest in spirit, and the most powerful person is the loneliest. Honor matters more than conquest. The alliance respected Cubana not because he was ruthless, but because he proved honor still existed in a world of betrayal. Character, integrity, and keeping your word are more valuable than any territory you can conquer. Remember, your circumstances don't define you, your choices do. Your past doesn't chain you, your decisions about the future do. And the people you judge today might be the ones who save you tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, moved your soul, or taught you something valuable, please like this story to show your support. Comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment? Which character resonated with you most? What lesson hit home for you? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that redemption is possible, that love is strength, and that it's never too late to choose humanity over hatred. Subscribe to never miss another powerful story of transformation, love, and second chances. Your engagement helps us create more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all of our shared humanity. Every like, comment, and share spreads this message of hope to someone who desperately needs it. What will you choose today? Will you be Cubana, building walls, or will you be Elizabeth, asking for what you need despite the fear? Drop your thoughts in the comments.